Human resources expert Sheryl Bender is with us, giving us all the best tips on getting your best interview.
Absolutely. Interviews are a situation where sometimes, if it's a panel interview, you can feel like you're in a firing squad, and it's generally, accepted that an interview is something that makes people nervous. But I think if you do a little bit of preparation, it'll actually be a lot easier to navigate your way through the interview.
Okay, what do you mean prepping for an interview?
I was thinking of making cookies and bringing them to the panel.
Okay, smart. True story. I did that once because I actually wanted to just show them about my supplement experience, starting my own business, and so I did bring them cookies. But when I say prepare for the interview,
did it work though?
No, I didn't get that.
It's a nice personal touch. I like it.
But actually, what I mean by that is a couple of different things. I think it's important to do a dry run when you're preparing for an interview. So, get a friend, colleague, some mentor, somebody to sit down with you and ask you some typical interview questions.
What are typical interview questions? I mean, what should we be prepping and asking?
Can we find them on the internet?
You can research them on the internet, but always be prepared to talk about your experience and your education as it relates to the position. But one thing I'd like to caution is it's great to rehearse your answers, but don't make it seem so canned because if it sounds a little too prepared, then that could leave a bad impression.
I always wonder too in the interviews when people ask the atypical question. Mm-hmm. You go in for a restaurant interview and people say, so what happened when you were 8 years old in your first family vacation? I mean, just like the most random questions.
Oh no, maybe I don't want that job because they're a little odd at this company.
Well, go ahead.
Well, you know what? Questions like those are typically they're not necessarily interested in what's happening, their actual answer to that question. They're looking at how you answer it, and in some cases, how well do you think on your feet? They're usually trying to get at something else when they ask you that sort of question. And the way that you respond is typically, the way you respond more so than the content of the answer is usually what they're looking for.
If you stay on your toes,
See if you have
if you're not thrown
right. Exactly.
by that.
Well, and I think a lot of people, what they go into, they see this job and they see the position, they think, oh, this is perfect for me. This will fit, the time that I need and all that. So they explain their answers that way of why the job would be perfect for them.
Exactly.
Versus thinking, why would you be perfect for this company?
Exactly.
That's a good point.
That's something that a lot of people don't really take into account because the fact of the matter is any employer who is filling a position, they're doing it to fill their needs. They're doing it to meet their goals. And, if it meets yours as well, that's lovely, that's all fine and good, but that's not the reason they're doing it. So if you come to an employer with a perspective of, here is what I can do for you, and of course, being able to speak to that means you will have done some research.
I was just going to ask you, is it beneficial, obviously, to do the research of the company, and then would you want to ask them a couple of very short, brief questions to show your interest on, where is the company going?
Absolutely. You always want to do your research on a company because in some cases, I can say, I have asked a candidate a question, tell us what you know about us. And if they don't know anything or if they just know some really general basic stuff that wouldn't require any research, then it lets me know that they haven't, really prepared for the interview the way that they should.
And if they've given you an answer, is it okay for them to say, have I answered your question?
Absolutely. You know what? That's one of the things, I'm glad you said that. When people are in interviews, they feel like, a lot of times they'll feel like the interviewer has all the power, and it's very responsible actually to ask if you've answered the question. And it's okay to take notes. It's okay to ask questions of them because a lot of times, sometimes, especially if you're in interviewing for a high-level position, they'll ask questions that have multiple parts. Well, if you don't hear all of those parts or if you don't remember all of those parts, then your answer can get off track quickly. So it's absolutely perfect to go back and say, you know what, can you repeat that question or can you repeat the next part of that? And then at the end of it, did I answer that to your satisfaction?
So everyone is coming with a list of some solid questions. What else should they bring to an interview?
You know what? Bring a copy of your resume because in my organization, all of our interview panelists are always extremely prepared. They've had the opportunity to review the candidates and their qualifications, but that's not necessarily the same in every organization. You could have had someone who just got pulled in off of their lunch break and said, hey, can you sit in all these interviews for me? And so if that's the case, then you want to make sure that they have the opportunity to assess you properly. So do have copies of your resume and be prepared to, share that if they ask. Or if, ask them, do you need to see one? What
about references?
References, you can provide them. I wouldn't say that it's mandatory at an interview, because the time that I check references as a recruiter is when I'm getting prepared to make an offer. So that said, if you've interviewed and you've interacted with this company or this organization for a little bit, and then they ask you for references, then that's typically a sign that you should be pretty encouraged.
Is it important to kind of become a friend of the person who's interviewing you, or just stay completely professional, or kind of a mixture of both?
Well, you know what? It's a mixture of both. It all depends on your personality, because
and the culture of the company.
And the culture of the company. I mean, on the one hand, you don't want to feel, you don't want to create an environment where it feels like there's forced friendship, or trying to force, an interaction that isn't necessarily there. But that said, if a situation calls for it, and, there's room for a little joke, or you make a funny or something, if that's already in your personality, then that's going to go a long way to put a lot of people
I always
at
like
ease.
to find something I relate to a person about, whether it's, some place we've been, or something they're wearing.
Absolutely.
Speaking
or some
of that,
research you did on that person, and you find out something about them.
Absolutely. And you know what? It is a good way to make a connection that isn't artificial. So yeah, that is helpful. So
I like the way the company has done this, or I
Right.
like to, give some examples of what the
Exactly.
company has done and some of their successes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for these great tips on
Absolutely.
helping us prepare and interview for the best. We wish you all the best, and we wish you all the best in the job hunt, keeping it together here on Every Way Woman.